Let's start in the region this hour with MS Now contributor Inzamam Rashid in Dubai. Also with us, our White House reporter Jake Traylor and MS Now military analyst, retired four-star General Barry McCaffrey. Inzamam, tell us about these latest strikes. Did Iran hit any of its targets in Israel, and where did Israel attack inside Iran?
Well, I think what you said at the very top there, Anna, that this is the biggest escalation since the US, Iran and Israel agreed that ceasefire back on the 8th or 9th of April. This certainly is the biggest escalation since then, because now we are in a situation where the Israelis and the Iranians could carry out attacks against each other whenever they feel like it, because over the last 24 hours or so, what we've seen between Israel and Iran has raised a lot of eyebrows, not just in this region, but clearly over to President Trump as well, into the White House and around the world as well. There's been a lot of condemnation, a lot of calls for de-escalation and restraint from many world leaders. Look, we're in a situation where, how have we got here? Well, as you mentioned, yesterday we saw the Israeli attacks into southern Beirut. That's been a red line for the Iranians. The IRGC then attacked as a result of that strike in Beirut. They targeted Israel with 4 rounds of ballistic missiles. And then, despite President Trump's request to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to retaliate, we then saw an Israeli retaliation. Now, the IDF claimed that they struck military sites inside of Iran. The Air Force as well, claiming that they struck a petrochemical complex in southwestern Iran, and there has been some imagery released showcasing that there has been fire coming out of what looks like a petroleum site in that area of Iran. Now, the Iranian attacks, the IDF are saying that their Iron Dome system has kicked in and they've managed to intercept nearly all of those Iranian ballistic missiles that were fired into Israel. We're now into a situation in the region where Iran has supposedly ended its attacks. That's what they've said. And unofficially, the Israelis have said that now as well. But what they have said, the Iranians, they've said that any further aggression and hostile acts, including in southern Lebanon, then much more severe and crushing measures than before will follow.
General McCaffrey, are you surprised Iran announced the end of this wave of attacks? What did they accomplish with this?
Well, look, objectively, Iran is in a terrible situation. Both economically, it's a basket case. The blockade has stopped their oil and deliveries to China. Their conventional forces have been degraded massively. The nuclear program has been set back significantly. Their own population despises their leadership. But having said that, the IRGC is now in control. They believe, I think correctly, they have the strategic advantage over the United States in the Gulf, notwithstanding the U.S. Navy's massive blockade of both southern Iran and also the Straits of Hormuz. So I think that Iran believes they're going to be able to outweigh Mr. Trump and force him to capitulate significantly, leaving them with partial control over the Straits and probably not delivering their nuclear weapons program capability to outside control. I think in the interim, what we're seeing is Iran can place Israel at risk somewhat and can place the Gulf Coast states at enormous risk, to include Saudi Arabia. So that's the tool that they're using.
Yeah, and we are now seeing the relationship between the U.S. and Israel under renewed scrutiny, Jake, with Trump saying he had called Netanyahu and told him not to strike back at Iran. And then in a separate interview, he said, quote, I call all the shots. He doesn't call the shots. And then we saw Israel strike Iran. So what happened on that call, and what's the White House posture today?
Yeah, Anna, the president saying that is really stark, because he's saying he calls all the shots while hours later, literally, Netanyahu called shots against Iran. I was on the phone with the White House official yesterday during the call as it was actively happening between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And that official told me the goal going into this call was to get Israel to not retaliate in any way whatsoever to diffuse the situation, to calm things down. And then, as we saw hours later, that wasn't the case. I also have just new reporting just moments ago, speaking with the White House official who told me that there was another call between Trump and Netanyahu earlier this morning, and they didn't yet divulge the contents of that call, but likely it is situated around continuing to diffuse what took place yesterday, as Inzamam noted there, essentially the highest escalation we've seen since the shaky ceasefire in April. The president multiple times in that interview with Kristen Welker yesterday of NBC saying that he has the upper hand, that Iran wants to make a deal. But then when pressed and asked, okay, then why haven't they tried to make a deal? Why is there not a deal on the table? The president's struggling for answers there. And so this is a real power brokerage sort of moment where the president is projecting that he is calling the shots. But in real time, we're also seeing Netanyahu behave the way that he wants to.
General, is it normal for the allied leaders in a joint war to be this public about not seeing eye to eye the way Trump and Netanyahu have been in recent weeks?
No. And, I've been a part of international arms control negotiations with the Russians and other nations, State Department led. I was part of the team of the JCS. I cannot imagine what the State Department and the senior leadership of the U.S. Armed Forces are thinking, given Mr. Trump's public attacks, both on Israel. I mean, humiliating Netanyahu and probably forcing him to respond to the Iranian attacks, and also attacking the Iranian senior leadership. I mean, he's come a long way from unconditional surrender, and I will help select the next Iranian leader, but he's still publicly stepping on his negotiators. You can't threaten people, humiliate them in public, and then privately ask them for concessions. So one of the biggest problems, I think, right now in national security is the president of the United States.
So frankly, Inzamam, is the ceasefire over? And are there any peace negotiations continuing?
Look, you've got to look back at how we've got to this point, Anna, and remember all this tit-for-tat fighting that we've seen between the US and Iran over the last couple of weeks, particularly around the Strait of Hormuz, with the US targeting military sites in southern Iran on the coastal south side of Iran, and then the Iranian retaliation into Kuwait and Bahrain. Remember, Iran hit Kuwait International Airport, killing some people there and injuring dozens and dozens more, also hitting targets inside Bahrain as well. And this is important because whilst that tit-for-tat fighting was taking place, we didn't see an all-out escalation from this conflict. But yes, it's built up to this moment. And also, we didn't actually see a complete end of discussions for negotiations. I think it slowed down considerably, but I do still think that dialogue has remained open and diplomacy has been taking place faintly in the background. The big question is now, as a result of this escalation between Israel and Iran, what does that do to peace negotiations? And last night, an Iranian official who's linked to the negotiations had sent me a message in which he basically said that a deal with President Trump is no longer feasible at this stage. And this official had blamed the president for the current situation inside of Lebanon and the current escalation. Now, last night, after the fighting began between Israel and Iran, the Iranian foreign minister had a rally around of phone calls with different world leaders and counterparts across the Gulf nations. Yesterday, President Trump had specifically said that a deal could be just days away, even by Wednesday, but it clearly looks very unlikely that the two sides are in a position to get a deal over the line, whilst this fighting is very much continuing, Anna.
Jake, officials are telling you the president fundamentally miscalculated. What more are you learning about the view from inside the White House as it relates to negotiations?
Yeah, that's the quote, on a fundamentally miscalculating in this situation, according to that one White House official who was describing essentially that when President Trump went into this war with Iran, there was an understanding that things may look as they have in previous wars before. They said that multiple times now internally inside the White House, there have been moments where the president, as well as his top White House aides, have come to grapple with the fact that Iran is not behaving in a normal way. They described it as erratic behavior, unpredictable behavior. And in moments like this, despite the United States in large parts wiping out significantly portions of Iran's military, still they are willing to continue. And obviously we saw that as they resumed conflict with Israel yesterday. That White House official continued on by saying the real struggle now for President Trump is finding any sort of an off-ramp, because the president needs to, whenever there's finally a peace deal reached, be able to point to something and say, this looks different. We've reached some level of success because of the war. Ideally, that's enriched uranium and fully removing that from Iran. But that's something that it seems right now is a massive sticking point that Iran has refused to capitulate on so far.